Ladies and gentlemen, there is a game. Well, it's a game in development. There will be a game, or might be a game, called God Save Birmingham that has people completely split. Some are calling it the next big thing in survival games, while others are convinced it's way too good to be true and that it could be a scam. And honestly, I get why. It's a medieval zombie survival sim set in a 14th century Birmingham with full physics-driven combat, barricading, and dismemberment. It sounds pretty insane, like something we've all dreamt of but never actually seen done well before. So here's the deal. There's a real team behind this with a legit publisher, and the footage we've seen so far almost too polished to ignore, I would say, suspiciously. It's one of those projects that make you wonder if we're looking at a hidden gem in the making or the next big gaming fiasco, you know, the day before, you know, something like that. In this video, we're going to dig through everything we know, who is making it, why people think it might be a scam, what you'll actually be doing in the game, and why this could be one of the most exciting survival titles on the horizon. Stick around because the story behind God Save Birmingham is way wilder than you might think. Before we dive into gameplay and whether God Save Birmingham is legit or not, we need to talk about the people behind it, because if you've been burned by hyped up survival games before, I know most of us have, the first question you should ask is always, who is making this thing and do they have the experience to actually deliver? The studio behind this ambitious project is Ocean Drive Studio, and they're not brand new to this industry. They are a South Korean studio that popped up onto the radar a couple of years ago with a tactical RPG called Lost and Dolans, which launched on Steam and consoles. And let's be honest, South Korea has been releasing absolute bangers, taking over the media space when it comes to movies, TV shows, and especially gaming recently. So I want to believe this game is going to do something more than try to take your money and run. Now, was Lost and Dolans some massive industry-shaking hit? No, it was mid-tier, AA style RPG that got a mixed but respectable reception, I would say. Think of it as proof of life. This team has shipped a full, complex game before, which isn't easy to do. That's already one major box checked when you're trying to figure out if a project is real or vaporware. One thing worth noting is that Ocean Drive Studio isn't pretending to be a giant AAA studio either. They're pretty transparent, at least about being a smaller, mid-sized team, and that actually works in their favor here. Smaller teams have pulled off insane passion projects before. Just look at Project Zomboid or Valheim. The difference here is Ocean Drive has a bit of funding and experience behind them, which gives them a more realistic shot at taking this wild medieval zombie concept and turning it into something playable. And then there's the publisher, Kakao Games. Kakao Games? Kakao Games. Now, if that name sounds familiar, it's because Kakao has been in the business for a while, especially in the MMO and online gaming space. They've published games like Black Desert Online, Elon, and Archie Age. While not every Kakao-backed game has been a home run, they're not in the business of publishing scams. They have an image to maintain, right? That can be one of the good things about having a publisher, and they've got deep pockets. So Kakao isn't just the kind of company that signs off on some random prototype unless they think it actually has potential. So the fact that they're backing God Save Birmingham already puts this project in a different league compared to something like the day before, which was basically being pushed by a marketing ghost town. It was a scam. But of course, it goes without saying, a developer having one game under their belt doesn't automatically mean they can pull off something this ambitious. That's the big question mark here. Lost and Dolans was a grid-based tactical RPG with a linear campaign. God Save Birmingham is the total opposite. It's an open world, physics-driven, hardcore survival sandbox. That is a leap. It's out of the league of what these guys are used to. That's like going from building a checkers game to building a paintball course or something like that. So there is a healthy amount of skepticism that is justified here. I would say be skeptical. However, Ocean Drive Studio has been surprisingly upfront about how much they are biting off. They're not overhyping the game with promises of some massive seamless MMO world. What they're aiming for in early access is a playable slice of the 14th century Birmingham, about a quarter of the city, with enough systems to make it feel like a survival sandbox. That's ambitious, but not impossible, especially with Unreal Engine 5 doing a lot of the heavy lifting on the visual and physics front. Another thing that caught my attention is how well they've been handling the press. This isn't a studio hiding in the shadows or pushing out pre-rendered trailers, even though the trailer we're watching right now is clearly scripted, and that's what kind of has everybody on edge. I would say this is the main reason that everybody is so on edge about this game. They brought a playable demo to PAX East in 2025 where real people actually got hands-on with the game, and those previews were cautiously positive. Outlets like Shack News and Game Rant mentioned that the combat felt weighty, the survival mechanics were punishing but engaging, and even in its rough pre-alpha state, it had a foundation that felt like a game and not just a scam. So that's good. They had a playable demo. They weren't afraid to show it off. They weren't afraid to bring it to actual gaming journalists. We usually don't see that level of transparency unless a studio knows it has something to show. You also have to consider that Kayako's involvement isn't just financial. Kayako tends to get hands-on with the projects they fund, especially when it comes to quality control and marketing. They're not the kind of publisher that throws money at a project and then disappears. We've got a track record of being directly involved with the publishing and shipping of games. That doesn't guarantee success, but it adds another layer of confidence for God Save Birmingham. There is also a business angle to consider. Kakao Games has been expanding aggressively into the Western market, being that the Western market, especially when it comes to media and gaming, has been on life support for the last couple of years. Backing a unique survival project like God Save Birmingham is a strategic move for them. It's a genre that has a hungry, loyal fan base, but one that's been burned a lot lately, let's be honest. If they can be the ones to publish a game that hits the sweet spot between hardcore survival and unique historical settings, that's a big win for their portfolio. Still, it's worth asking, is Ocean Drive the right studio for this kind of game? They've never made a survival game before, at least not publicly, although this isn't a random team of rookies either. Many of the core developers have backgrounds in other studios working on projects ranging from RPGs to action titles. They've got some industry veterans on board, and the way they talk about God Save Birmingham feels pretty grounded. There's no we're reinventing the entire genre nonsense. They're focusing on physics-driven combat, realistic survival loops, and building tension through scarcity and danger. And that is a lot more believable than a studio claiming they're just building the next GTA-sized survival MMO. And this scripted gameplay trailer isn't the only thing they've released. They've actually released hour-long gameplay footage that looked far more buggier and full of performance issues than the obvious scripted gameplay. And that's believable, but they did shoot themselves in the foot releasing both of these things and showing a pretty major difference between the two pieces of footage. So now it has people saying like, well, they're a scam, but if they were a scam, why would they release this kind of crummy footage afterwards? And I think it has a lot of people divided on what to think about this game. Another interesting detail is how Ocean Drive is marketing the game. They're leaning into the historical side of things. The 14th century Birmingham isn't exactly a setting we see in games, and especially in like a survival setting. It's almost like, let's take how much it sucks to live in the medieval age and crank it up to 11 with a zombie horde. Like, you're already a peasant trying to feed yourself and probably dying of disease every year, but just let's have a zombie apocalypse. I feel like it would be the type of scenario where the odds are certainly stacked against you, to say the least, you know? It's a medieval game, but it's not like medieval fantasy. It's trying to capture a gritty real world vibe, almost like what Kingdom Come Deliverance did, but with zombies and survival mechanics layered on top. That kind of approach requires a deep understanding of historical detail and environment storytelling, and from what we've seen from the demo footage, they're certainly pulling off that accuracy that we would see from real medieval cities. The streets, the timber framed buildings, the plague ridden atmosphere, it feels cohesive. And maybe that's why people are so suspicious when something looks this unique and polished so early. It triggers the this has to be fake instinct. But Ocean Drive's past work and Kayako's backing makes it at least plausible that what we're seeing is the real deal. So now that we know who's behind God Save Birmingham, let's talk about what everybody's kind of saying right now. Why are so many people calling this game a scam? Because if we just look around, if you've been following the survival genre, you know how many projects have overpromised and then either collapsed or straight up vanished. It's left people with their guard up, and God Save Birmingham walks straight into that minefield, especially with a completely scripted gameplay trailer just like this. And the skepticism really did start with this trailer. When the game was first revealed at Gamescom 2024, the footage was shockingly polished, right? Like, how is this mid-sized studio pulling this off? We saw physics-driven combat with zombies staggering realistically, dismemberment that looked too responsive, and environments that had this eerie, plague-ridden beauty to them. It was the kind of trailer that makes you do a double take, but that level of presentation from a team this size can set off alarm bells because we've seen this play out before. Come on. The most obvious comparison that people are always pointing to is The Day Before. That game sold itself as this revolutionary survival MMO and had slick trailers to back it up, and we all know how that ended. Empty promises, delays, and eventually a complete disaster when the game actually launched. The studio just shut down, what, 4 days later? So when a studio like Ocean Drive comes along claiming to have not just an open world survival game but a medieval one with fully interactive physics, the too good to be true vibe starts to really creep in here. And it's not just about how the game looks either. The concept itself sounds completely wild. A historically accurate Birmingham in the 1300s, crawling with zombies with survival mechanics that go beyond the usual craft, eat, repeat type of loop. You can see why people are suspicious. Most survival games these days struggle to nail even one or two of these ideas, let alone all of them at once. It's ambitious, and probably too ambitious. Then there's the fact that God Save Birmingham came out of nowhere. Ocean Drive isn't a household name, and while they've shipped a game before, they're not exactly known for pushing technical boundaries like this. For a lot of people, that's enough reason to raise an eyebrow. If this game had been revealed by a well-known indie team or a larger AA studio, the reaction might have been different, but coming from a relatively quiet developer, it feels like this sudden massive leap out of left field. But like we were talking about before, this is a South Korean publisher and they haven't broken into the Western market quite as much as they want to yet. So that could explain why they've been so under the cover for this long. Another factor is the lack of extended raw gameplay footage. While we've seen impressive trailers and demo clips, which are certainly lengthier, we have yet to see a deep dive of uninterrupted gameplay. The kind where the developer plays for hours on end showing exactly how everything works. At least not the type of gameplay that I would feel comfortable with spending money on a game like this. In the survival genre, that's huge, right? They gotta show what they're doing here. And it's one thing to show carefully edited cinematic moments or scripted gameplay that you kind of try to play off as gameplay, but it's another thing to see what it looks like to scavenge, manage your inventory, craft tools, or survive a random horde attack with no actual cuts. The absence of that has fueled some doubt, and honestly, I get it. We're at the point in gaming where fans want transparency up front, especially after being burned by fake vertical slices. And I understand we're looking at something like that already, but it's buggy. I wonder if it's going to be any better when the game actually releases. And like I said before, what I'm looking at right now isn't something I'm willing to spend my money on quite yet without some real gameplay, not scripted gameplay, and real gameplay that's not as buggy as the real gameplay they have shown us so far. So here's another thing that complicates the scam narrative. God Save Birmingham has actually been playable in person. As I mentioned earlier, people got hands-on with a pre-alpha build at PAX East 2025. They were taking real players, sitting them down, giving them a controller, and seeing the mechanics in action. Sure, it was a small slice of the game, maybe 10 minutes of a controlled environment, but it's a lot more than what scam projects usually show, right? Most scam games never leave the cinematic trailer phase because there's nothing underneath. Here we have journalists and players confirming that yes, there's at least a foundation of a game here. Still, there's this lingering doubt about how much of what we've seen is actual gameplay versus carefully staged showcases. Some players who tried the demo said that the combat was promising, but still rough around the edges, which is fair for an early build. But when you have flashy dismemberment physics in a scripted trailer, people expect the final game to look and feel exactly like that, which of course it won't. And the reality of game development is that things can change a lot at launch, right? We've seen it time and time again. Another angle of skepticism is just the genre itself. Survival games have almost become cursed in the eyes of the community. Think about how many promising projects have launched, broken, lacked content, or been abandoned within a year. The Day Before was completely abandoned. Even something like Last Oasis, it was all hyped to death and dropped off the face of the earth. No one knows where the hell that game is anymore. It's created this knee-jerk reaction where every new survival game, especially one that dares to be different, automatically gets accused of being fake or a cash grab. God Save Birmingham isn't immune to that. If anything, its unique setting makes people even more suspicious because it's trying something that no one else has done before. And I think there's a weird psychology around ambition in indie games. When a big studio like Capcom or Bethesda shows off something something massive, we assume they can do it. When a mid-sized indie team shows off something equally as ambitious, the immediate reaction is no way, they are faking it for sure. A lot of the times that is true. We've all seen scams ride on pretty trailers before, but other times it's just a sign that we're underestimating what smaller studios are capable of with modern tools like Unreal Engine 5. So is the skepticism justified? Absolutely. In my mind, it's definitely justified. I'm skeptical beyond belief. I think it's less about God Save Birmingham specifically, more about the collective trauma of survival games. This game has the misfortune of launching its hype train in the shadows of some of the biggest industry screw-ups I've ever seen. I want to dive into some reasons why it might be legit though. There is a very real chance that God Save Birmingham could fizzle out, disappointment, or even be a well-polished scam. I'm not here to sell you on that dream, but I also don't want to dismiss the possibility that this game could be the real deal, because the signs pointing toward it being legit are stronger than I initially expected. First, the elephant in the room. There's a playable build, not a cinematic trailer, not just concept art, but actual slices of the game that people outside of the studio have played. At PAX East 2025, journalists and random players got their hands on it, and the impressions weren't just fluff PR lines. Shack News, Game Rant, and other studios reported that the combat, while still clunky in some spots, felt responsive and weighty. Players could barricade doors, interact with physics systems, and take on zombies in a way that wasn't just smoke and mirrors. That alone puts God Save Birmingham in a different category than vaporware projects like Abandon, which never even had a chance to be abandoned because it didn't even come to existence. It was just all vaporware. And then looking at the developer's track record, of course, Ocean Drive Studios isn't a fly-by-night team. They shipped Los Edelons, and while that game wasn't groundbreaking, it was completed and fully supported post-launch. This isn't an anomalous group hiding behind stock photos and fake LinkedIn profiles, right? The studio is a real studio. The devs have faces, resumes, and they've already navigated the rough waters of launching a mid-budget game on Steam and consoles. The publisher is another big deal here. Kakao Games is no angel. They've had some hits and some misses, but they're a known entity. A scam project wouldn't have a publisher like Kakao attached, especially one that has a reputation to protect in both the Eastern and Western gaming markets where they're trying to break into something new. Kakao doesn't need a quick cash grab. They're not in the business of risking their name on something that is purely smoke. That doesn't mean the game will be good, but it does make an outright scam way less likely, I think. Another thing to consider is how the developers are talking about the game. If you've listened to their interviews like I have and read their press releases, there's no over-the-top promises of reinventing gaming as we know it. They're focusing on very grounded mechanics, physics-based combat, and a realistic survival loop, and a historically accurate setting. It's ambitious, but it's not the kind of too big to exist pitch we usually see with scams. If anything, their honesty about being a smaller team working toward early access in 2026 makes them sound like they understand the scope of what they're building. And of course, there's the tech. You know, Unreal Engine 5 is making it easier than ever for smaller studios to achieve high fidelity visuals and physics. What we're seeing in God Save Birmingham, the lighting, the texture quality, even the dismemberment isn't out of reach for a team this size if they're smart about asset creation and focus on a smaller contained world rather than a sprawling map. They've said that early access will only feature about a quarter of the city, which feels like a manageable goal instead of promising some giant endless world, and that's another point to their favor, I would say. Still, I want to be clear, this doesn't mean the game is safe from disaster. We've seen real studios, even with good intentions, fail to deliver on their ideas. It's entirely possible that God Save Birmingham will launch in early access and feel half-baked, or worse, get abandoned if the developer stalls. But if we're just asking, is this a scam, meaning is this all just a fake game designed to cash out on the hype? The answer is there's real evidence that something tangible is being built here. There's also the fact that they've chosen a unique setting that isn't chasing trends. If this was a scam, you'd expect them to slap together another post-apocalyptic modern city survival game because that's what's trending, right? But God Save Birmingham is so niche, right? Medieval England with plagued zombies, that it feels more like a passion project than a cash grab. Scammers don't usually put together this much effort into creating a unique identity for a game. They just mimic what's already popular. So while I'm still skeptical, very skeptical at that, and you should be too, there are enough green flags to at least keep this on the radar. It's not proof, but It's better than like 90% of what we've seen from failed survival projects in the past few years. This isn't a guaranteed hit, but it's also not setting off the classic scam alarms. If there's one thing that immediately grabs your attention about God Save Birmingham, it's how downright strange and specific the concept is. A survival game set in the 14th century Birmingham during a plague outbreak with zombies crawling through cobblestone streets and timber framed houses. That's not a setting we see at all. Survival games are usually modern, post-apocalyptic. This one looks like someone took Kingdom Come Deliverance, spliced it with Project Zomboid, and then wanted to make it into a 3D Unreal Engine game. And the setting, from what I've read, isn't just for show. Ocean Drive Studio has been vocal about their historical research, aiming to recreate the vibe of Birmingham in the 1300s, a time when disease, starvation, and just surviving the night were already brutal realities, even before you threw zombies into the mix. You can see it in the game's early footage. Narrow, claustrophobic streets, markets filled with rotting produce, and the grim, unpolished architecture that feels like it's just waiting for the next fire or plague to wipe it out. It's grimy, dark, and oppressive, the kind of environment that sells the survival horror vibe perfectly. What really sets it apart is the physics-driven gameplay. Instead of just swinging your weapon in a canned animation, the combat is built on a system where weapon strikes, collisions, and dismemberment all depend on where you hit and how much force you apply. Early previews from the people who tried at PAX East mentioned how satisfying it felt to push zombies back with a shield or jam furniture against the door to block them out. This isn't your typical run into a building and hit E to close the door kind of game. You're physically moving and stacking objects to create barriers like you're in a 3D Project Zomboid. That kind of player agency, if it works as well as they're promising, could be a pretty big game changer. Another interesting feature is how the survival loop isn't just about eating food and drinking water every 5 minutes. It sounds like they're going for a more holistic approach, where you're constantly balancing stamina, injuries, hunger, and fear. Think less about micromanaging meters and more about making tough calls. Do you spend the night fortifying your safe spot, or do you risk sneaking out to find more food, knowing that the streets will be crawling with the infected? The game wants you to feel the weight of those decisions, and that's something we don't see often enough in modern survival titles that lean too hard into grinding or crafting. And then, of course, there's the dismemberment system, which is something I'm excited about. I have no shame in admitting that. In most survival games, a zombie is just, an NPC with a health bar. In God Save Birmingham, you can actually cripple enemies by taking off a limb or slowing them down with precise strikes. That means combat isn't just about standing there and hacking away at the NPC until his health bar is down to 0. It's about using the environment and your tools to survive encounters intelligently. If you can't kill every zombie, maybe you just knock a few down or trap them behind debris while you make a run for it. That is a much more tense and creative approach to survival than just spamming attacks, right? And then there's the atmosphere. It's hard to ignore. Even in the early footage, the sound design and lighting create this constant feeling of dread. You hear the cracks of wooden doors and the distant moans of zombies echoing down the alleys, and the heavy breathing of your character when you've been sprinting for too long. It feels very claustrophobic in the best way, like you're never truly safe no matter where you are. But again, skepticism creeps in. All of this sounds amazing, but we've heard similar promises before. Remember the day before showing off their next gen survival systems that ended up being half-baked at launch? This is where the doubt definitely creeps in for me. We've only seen snippets of God Save Birmingham, and until we get an extended look at how these unique systems work over a long play session that aren't buggy or performance heavy, we can't really confirm how deep or functional they are. It's one thing to release a highly scripted gameplay trailer. It's another thing to make sure the whole game loop supports that level of interaction without breaking. Still, I have to admit, this combination of medieval history, gritty survival mechanics, and physics-based gameplay is something no one else is doing right now. Even if the game launches rough, there's a strong chance it'll carve out a niche simply because it's no different from the sea of cookie-cutter survival games that's already out there. So what will you actually be doing at God Save Birmingham once you've dropped into this grim, plague-ridden city? From everything we've gathered, the core loop is built around one simple but brutal reality: survive by any means necessary. It doesn't seem like this is the kind of game where you're just leveling up a hero or following a neat storyline. It's about waking up in the middle of a city that wants you dead and figuring out how to make it through the night without starving, bleeding out, or getting torn apart by the undead. You start out with nothing, a weapon that's barely better than a stick, maybe a few scraps of food, and your first instinct will be to scavenge. That means rummaging through abandoned shops, breaking into boarded up houses, and taking risks just to find something useful. But every move you make is going to cost you. Sprinting drains stamina, carrying too much slows you down, and staying out too long might get you cornered in one of Birmingham's narrow alleyways with no escape. From what we know, risk management is at the heart of this game. It doesn't doesn't look like there's going to be as much meaningless grinding as much as there's going to be trying to figure out how far you're willing to push your luck. Crafting and resource management will also play a big role, but not in the make 500 stone axes kind of way that's killed a lot of survival games in the past. Ocean Drive Studio is promising a more grounded crafting system where every item feels like it has weight and purpose. For example, you can take a broken chair leg and turn it into a makeshift club, or stack planks to barricade doors and create traps. It's all physics driven, which means you're not just clicking a menu button, you're physically placing and moving objects almost like a survival puzzle. If this system works as intended, it could add a level of tension that menu-based crafting simply just can't do. Combat is another pillar of the gameplay, and it's looking like it'll lean heavily on timing and positioning rather than button mashing. Since it's the medieval ages, the zombies won't just be bullet sponges, mostly because guns aren't a thing in the medieval ages, right? You'll be fighting with crude melee weapons, swords, axes, spears, and whatever sharp objects you can get your hands on, and it kind of balances out the game that the zombies are slow and stupid as well. And because the combat is built on physics, the angle and force of your strikes will matter also. You can cripple a zombie by taking out its legs, shove it to a wall, or knock it down long enough to escape. It looks like a game where you're not going to be killing everything in your sight, right? It's more about using your head to survive encounters you can't win and getting out alive. Kind of like a survive at the skin of your teeth type of game. The safe house system seems to be another big part of the loop. In the demo, players could fortify a small building and turn it into a temporary base. Think of it like the safe houses in Project Zomboid, but in a full 3D space where every door, window, and barricade can be physically manipulated. There's a lot of potential here for players' creativity. Imagine dragging tables across doorways, stacking barrels, and creating a fortress out of whatever junk you can find. It's the kind of system that can lead you to those intense, I barely survived the night type of stories that survival fans live for. Then there's the exploration. The developers have said that early access will feature about a quarter of Birmingham, but even that is sounding pretty dense. We're talking winding streets, cramped houses, and multiple points of interest to scavenge. The environment itself might be just as dangerous as the zombies. The medieval world was harsh long before the undead showed up, that's for sure. Expect to deal with things like hunger, thirst, disease, and injury. There's mention of a medical system where untreated wounds can get infected, forcing you to scavenge for bandages or improvise treatment from herbs and alcohol. The game is going to have a big aspect of survive the plague-stricken city itself. But again, because I have to, I'm going to pull the brakes a little bit here. While all this sounds incredibly cool, we've seen these mechanics in controlled snippets, scripted gameplay events. A short demo can make stacking furniture to block a door look pretty cool, but how well does this system hold up after 10 hours of gameplay? Will it still feel dynamic, or will it get repetitive? That's the part we don't know yet, and until we see long uncut gameplay sessions, we have to take the devs for their word. The loop as we understand it is survival first, exploration second, and storytelling somewhere in the background. And that could be kind of boring and repetitive, honestly. Ocean Drive has hinted at a narrative layer that will expand post early access, but for now the focus is clearly on giving players the tools to create their own stories. If they can nail that, balance letting players write their own survival tales while keeping a cohesive world, if they can nail that balance, letting players write their own survival tales while still keeping a cohesive world, it could put God Save Birmingham in the same conversation as games like Project Zomboid or even the Stalker mods in terms of the emergent gameplay, the emergent storytelling. At the end of the day, the core loop looks like this scavenge, fortify, survive, repeat, but every step is meant to feel dangerous and consequential. It's about outsmarting both the environment and the infected, using limited resources and whatever clever strategies you can come up with. If the final game captures even half the tension that these early demos are teasing, this could be one of the most unique survival experiences we've seen ever. But that's a big if. But now you probably get that God Save Birmingham is one of those games that's both incredibly intriguing and a little suspicious. But let's put all the pieces on the table for us to put together. What do we actually know? Confirmed, verifiable information about this project and where it's headed. First of all, the game is being built by Unreal Engine 5, which explains why it looks so visually impressive in every clip we've seen. Unreal Engine 5 gives even smaller studios the tools to produce stunning lighting, realistic materials, and advanced physics without needing a 300-person team. That's how we're seeing these dynamic shadows and torchlight and the gruesome combat and the gritty textures of medieval Birmingham streets. Of course, having a powerful engine doesn't mean the game will magically be good though, something too many studios have tried to pitch in the past. But it does make these ambitious visuals and mechanics more plausible. The release timeline is the first big clue about the devs' intentions. Ocean Drive Studios is promising a 1.0 release out of the gate. They've openly said that they'll be launching into early access in around 2026 sometime, which is a realistic move. It means they know this game is massive and complex, and hopefully they're prepared to iterate based on feedback. In early access, only a quarter of the city of Birmingham will be accessible, like I've said many times before. That might sound small, but if the density and detail are as strong as the demo suggests, that's more than enough space for players to test the systems, experiment with survival strategies, and totally break things, which is exactly what early access is meant for. From there, the plan is to expand gradually. More districts of Birmingham, more tools, crafting recipes, new zombie types, environmental hazards, and eventually a light narrative campaign layered on top of the sandbox. This staggered rollout makes sense, but here's where I stay cautious. We've all seen early access games that launch with a promising roadmap, only to stall out or pivot to something entirely different. If Ocean Drive can't keep up with the updates, the momentum will die fast. I am comforted by the fact that they've done post-launch support before with Lost Delon, so there's at least a track record of finishing what they started. We also know that the game will be PC first, launching on Steam with plans for console ports like PS5 and Xbox Series. This is another green flag because it means they're not overextending themselves by trying to optimize for every platform on day one. Survival games are complicated beasts. Even the good ones tend to launch with bugs, so focusing on one platform at a time is a smart move. When it comes to content and gameplay features, the studio has been surprisingly detailed about their vision. They have the dynamic day-night cycle that directly affects zombie behavior. At night, they become more aggressive, forcing you to prepare or hide before darkness falls. A full-blown weather system like rain and fog that reduce visibility, making exploration riskier, but also adding opportunities to sneak past infected. And advanced AI that supposedly reacts to noise and light, meaning barricading a door isn't just about blocking a path, but also staying quiet while scavenging inside. They'll have a disease and injury system where untreated wounds can fester and infection spreads if you're not careful, tying survival mechanics into the grim realities of the 1300s. Now, all this sounds pretty great on paper, but you know as well as I do that bullet points don't mean much until you see them in action over a long play session. We've heard promises of advanced AI before, only to end up with zombies that walk into walls or get stuck in doorways. This is where my skepticism stays high. I want to see this stuff actually working in uninterrupted gameplay, something in my hands that I'm playing, not just an hour long of buggy gameplay or a highly scripted gameplay footage. Let's not ignore the Gamescom 2025, which is shaping up to be a big moment for God Save Birmingham. They've confirmed a new playable demo will be there. This time it's expected to be longer and more open than the pack slice. If they show raw gameplay, uncut sessions where people can see exactly how survival plays out over time, it could silence a lot of the doubters, or it could confirm the worst fears if it turns out the trailers have oversold on the game's depth. As for pricing, we don't have exact numbers yet, but expect typical early access price points somewhere around in the $30 to $40 range. This is another area where caution is needed. If a game launches at a premium price but feels incomplete, that will be a red flag. I'll say it again, do not pre-order, do not throw money at it until we see more. No matter how good it looks, the survival genre has taught us that patience saves a lot of regret and your money. One thing that is interesting, and I know that a lot of people want, is the devs have hinted at co-op being added later, though it won't be part of the early access launch. That would be huge if done well, but it's also a massive technical challenge. Adding multiplayer to a game built on physics-based interactions is not trivial, and I'd rather see them nail the single-player loop before worrying about co-op. If they rush it, it could tank performance and cause more harm than good. Survival genre has been stuck in a rut for a little while. Most games are either a clone of Rust, DayZ, or The Forest, recycling the same chop trees, craft shelters, survive zombie formula. There's also the niche factor. Games like Valheim proved that if you create a very unique experience that taps into a specific mood or setting, you can dominate the genre quite literally overnight. The 14th century zombie game is as niche as it gets, but that's exactly why it could capture attention. Nobody else is doing this. So where does God Save Birmingham stand right now? Well, it's one of the most ambitious survival projects I've seen in a very long time. A game that's trying to bring something fresh to a genre that desperately needs it. The mix of gritty 14th century setting, physics-based survival mechanics, and that raw do whatever it takes to live gameplay loop is exciting. It's the kind of game that, if it works, could be the next Project Zomboid or Valheim. Everybody suddenly is talking about it because it offers something new. But I'm not going to feed you a plate of shit and call it caviar. This could go sideways. There's a lot of promises here, and while there's evidence that Ocean Drive Studio is building something real, we can't ignore the track record of survival games that looked amazing on paper but launched broken, hollow, or abandoned. The difference here is we've seen real hands-on demos, we know the studio and publisher have shipped games before, and there's a roadmap that, for now, feels attainable. I don't want to pass this game up, being that big creators have already called this game an official scam. So if you enjoyed this really deep breakdown and want more brutally honest breakdowns like this, hit the like button, consider subscribing if you got some use out of this video, hit the bell notification so you don't miss the next one. I do really niche, cool, under the cover type games that people might not have heard about and do deep dives on them. Probably won't go as deep as this one here, but it was a topic I was quite interested in, and hopefully you were too. So thank you very much for watching to the end of the video, and have yourselves a very nice day.